Councilmember Griffin.
Hey, everybody.
All right, hey, Mr.
All
Mayor.
right, well, Mayor,
Well,
good late.
Slipped on home between meetings. I want to show y'all something in a moment.
Oh, he just wants to show off his dog now is what he's going to do.
Yeah, how many of y'all saw my little puppy after
Yeah.
Christmas? Remember
Haven't.
she-
Haven't.
Show 'em.
Yes, right? Lucy, come here. Come here,
This is truly a full-time job.
come here.
Yes, it is. Thank you, Councilmember Gregory.
Say it.
Come here.
How's your mom?
Incredible.
There
Incredible.
she is. Oh, she's growing.
Aw.
Oh,
There
wow.
you go.
There
She's
he
growing.
is.
Hi.
Yeah, she's growing now. There you go.
That's awesome.
yeah.
What kind of dog is that, Mayor?
She's a standard poodle.
Oh, wow.
She's gone from like 6 pounds to 40 in
Yeah, that's what I said.
3 months' time. It's amazing.
That dog needs to be walked more.
Jeremy, can you switch me back over to host? And we are up on YouTube.
All right. Thank you, Madam Clerk.
All right, well, Mr. Chairman, Joint Chairman here. Why don't we call this meeting to order? Who's going to lead off on this one?
I don't know.
Well, I flipped a coin and I won, so I'll lead off, okay?
Good. You go right ahead. You go right ahead. I don't have no problem with that.
Let's call the meeting to order. And I'm going to ask Councilman Gregory to bring a few words.
Uh-oh. Let's
You
just
did pretty good the other night, man. I'm telling you, man. You did good.
let's just take a moment of silence. Amen.
Amen.
Man.
I would tell your mom on you, but I'm not.
I know.
Number one, I want to thank everybody for taking the extra time, and I know how time is pressed for all of us, including myself, to learn more about how these TIF districts work. It's a complicated subject, but I think it would be great if all of us got our thinking caps on, learn from the past, and hopefully apply it to what we have to do going forward. Mayor Rowley had a wonderful funding formula to resurrect the peninsula. And there were, I think, at least 5 TIF districts, many of which were blighted areas, not blighted today, but during the time they certainly applied those areas and drew those maps, look nothing like they look today. So we've got examples of what have worked well, which ones hadn't worked well, and some of the things that's causing those things not to work well. With that, I'm gonna turn it over to Amy so she can kind of begin to walk us through this.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon, Amy.
Afternoon.
This is kind of a long one, but I will go through it quickly as I can since it's late for everybody I know.
I
So
want to
this-
thank you in advance though, Amy. Amy burned the midnight oil on this for all of us. So this kind of harkens back to budget ad hoc. So we'll
Sounds like
thank you Ann as well. Go ahead.
that's normal for her, I think.
Well,
Okay.
And you know, I have between midnight and 6 a.m. available, so really it's okay. Good. Just some basic information to start with, because I'm not sure how much everyone knows about TIFs, but they're really special tax districts around targeted redevelopment areas from which future tax revenues are captured to finance infrastructure improvements and or development. Most TIF periods last between 20 and 30 years, and they can only be used in neighborhoods officially designated as blighted. And once a district is designated, the taxable value of the properties, known as the equalized assessed value, is frozen. And that is the base property value and represents the funds that of all the participating tax collecting jurisdictions. They'll keep that base property value and they'll collect that throughout the duration of the TIF, but the increment above that goes directly to the TIF district. So when we say it hurts the general fund, we'll continue to collect the base property value of taxes over the life of the TIF, but any additional tax revenue goes to the TIF district, or to the TIF fund, I should say, and does not go to the general fund. Does that make sense? Okay. And then if it's working as intended, the property values will increase and over that period due to the infrastructure upgrades, and the property owners will be contributing more in taxes. The growth in the tax revenue, which is called the tax increment, is allocated to the TIF and used to finance infrastructure projects. And then the initial bonds must be issued within 10 years of the creation of the TIF, which then triggers the capturing of the increment.
It's been.
Yeah.
So most people think that as soon as the TIF starts and we start capturing the revenue, but we don't. We don't capture it until the first borrowing is put in place. So I just want to make that clear. Does that make sense, everyone?
Yes.
Can you say that again, Amy? You broke up a little bit. We don't.
Okay. Let me open up my computer because sometimes that happens with me. Is that a little bit better? A little better?
One phrase when you were saying
Okay.
we can start capturing.
So as soon as the initial bonds, they have to be issued within 10 years. And once that bond is issued, that's when we start capturing the increment, the revenue increment. But we don't do that until that happens, which I'll show you when we're talking about all the individual TIFs. I'll show you the revenue, and you'll see for the West Ashley, the Church Creek, we don't have revenue numbers because we haven't borrowed on those TIFs yet. So just want to make sure everybody understood that. And then once the TIF period ends, all the tax revenues flow back to the tax collecting jurisdictions. The property has to be publicly owned in order to invest TIF funds, but with the exception of affordable housing projects. But it has to be for below 80% median income. And then we're limited to spending TIF funds within the TIF district unless the council makes a specific finding that spending TIF funds outside the TIF district will benefit the TIF district. And that's done by ordinance or resolution. And one example I could give you is the affordable housing parcel for the low line section. We did an ordinance or resolution, I can't remember which way it went, in order to include that in the TIF. This is just basic information. The overlapping tax entities that can contribute to the TIF is County of Charleston, which includes the Parks and Recreation and Trident Tech, the school district and the school district. They don't have to contribute, they elect to contribute. And so this is basically their 2020 millage rates and our millage rate as well, just to give you an idea of how much of those overlapping taxing entities contribute to the TIF. And so you can see how important it is for the school district to contribute to the TIF. Any questions on that? Okay, so borrowings and revenue connection projections, sorry. The banks will look at the most recent assessed values from the county when they're determining the amount they'll loan us. They really don't consider projected revenues for future years unless they'll look at it a little bit just based on natural growth. But they won't look at anything in terms of what properties might be coming online and all that, because all of that is uncertain. They'll just look at natural growth. We, right in finance, we do revenue projections for the King Street Gateway TIF because all of those projects right now are on a pay-as-you-go basis because we're towards the end of the TIF and we wouldn't do any more borrowings. And we would just do pay-as-you-go above whatever we have to pay for the remaining debt payments on the bond that we have for the King Street Gateway TIF. We base it on natural growth, and we're always very conservative in that, just to determine the amount we would have for future projects. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the King Street Gateway TIF. We have not projected out revenue for the remaining TIFs because, like I said, we'll do borrowings on those, and it's always based on the recent assessed values. That's what the bank always goes by. And once they come close to maturity, where we'll be able to complete projects on a pay-as-you-go basis, that's when we'll start projecting revenues out. Just to make sure, and like I said, we're always very conservative to see what projects we might be able to fit in, and that we're not overextending the TIF based on what we're projecting revenues on. because we wouldn't want to add more projects than we think we can handle for that TIF.
So Amy, before you leave that point, when we go to the bank,
Mhm.
borrow money, at that point, is that when the TIF, when we really get an actual accurate value of obviously what can be borrowed versus what's been estimated?
Yes. So I can give you an example. We were considering doing a TIF a bond for the Charleston Neck TIF at the end of the year. And I think the developer that's associated with that TIF thought we could do maybe around $10 million or so. We went to the bank, they said we can only borrow 7. So it's always based on what the bank says we can borrow.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And Mr. Chairman, Amy, when you say bank and borrow, you're really talking about the bond issuer, correct?
Right, that's correct, yes. Okay, so these are our current TIF districts right now. We have 7 active TIFs. We have the King Street Gateway, Charleston Neck, Cooper River Bridge, Horizon, West Ashley, Church Creek, and Morrison Drive.
Amy, can you give us the ages on those 7 districts?
Yes, I will do that when we talk about each individual one, if you don't mind, because I have all that information for each individual TIF.
Thanks.
Okay. So the first, this is a map of all of the TIF districts together. So the up here in this corner here, that's the Church Creek drainage TIF. We have the West Ashley TIF right here, the Magnolia TIF, the Morrison Drive is this orangish yellow. This was the Waterfront Park TIF, which is ended. The pinkish is King Street Gateway, and the blue is the Cooper River Bridge TIF, and the purple is the West Edge TIF or the Horizon TIF. So we have the King Street Gateway TIF, and that's just the map of the Gateway TIF itself, and it's all the pink that you see there. And it was adopted in 1993. It was extended in 2015. The school district decided not to stay in the TIF, and it will expire in fall of 2023. So the school district is no longer contributing to that TIF. The beginning equalized assessed value was 4.6 million. As of 12/31/2019, it was at 85 million. And just to let you know, we never received we'll receive current assessed value, equalized assessed values from the county probably the end of April, beginning of May. So I just don't have 2020's numbers yet. These are examples of the projects that we completed with the King Street Gateway TIF. You see Charlotte Street Park, Spring Canyon Street Escape, the Gilliard Center, Lemminger, a lot for Septima Clark, and the Low Line. This is the purchase of the property for the Low Line.
Hey, Amy,
Mm-hmm.
to give us sort of a point of reference, what was our total contribution for the renovation of the Gilliard Center? You know,
Well, the total contribution, so we have this, we did a $32 million bond that we paid for out of, this, as well as this $34 million contribution.
so that paid for the whole Gilliard renovation plus some.
Well, and then, we had this was just the actual performing arts center side of it.
So what was, I'm just trying to give a.
No, it wasn't. That's not right. I'm sorry. That was for the whole thing. Our contribution for the whole project. And then we had the donor for the rest of the project.
So what was the total cost of the project, if you remember? Was it sales close?
I thought it was 142 million.
It was, but it ended up being a little bit more towards the end with the settlement and all of that, but it was,
Right.
it was 140 something.
Well, and I just want to point that out because that just shows the value of the TIF when you get a project just of that alone, how much money the TIF captured, and look what it did in doing that.
Oh, remember now, Peter, half of those dollars came from the donors, so about 71 plus million, including
That's
the
right.
stuff that came from the city.
But that's our contribution.
Yeah.
Right, that half of it was. Right?
Yeah. And then there were other smaller projects too, but I just included the ones that were over $1 million. But we did some other smaller projects as well. And then this is the history of the assessed values and related revenue. So you could see, and that was the initial we're at 85 million, and the associated revenue with that 85 million in equalized assessed value was, we received $8.8 million in 2019.
And we only have a few years to go, you said?
It ends in 2023.
That was a good one. Yeah.
We've milked that pretty good.
Yeah.
That's a,
And so much of this TIF is pledged for the Septim and Clark drainage project. We are projecting by the end of the TIF in 2023, we could have a $10 million surplus. However, we're not really allocating any other projects right now because we do not have the final construction costs for phase 5 of the Septim and Clark project. It's currently, we're finalizing the phase 5 design, and we'll have a better cost estimate in a year or so and a better bid cost by the end of 2022. So we're just being very conservative and cautious because, as we all know, construction costs go higher and higher every year. And there is outstanding debt from the, we had borrowed $32 million in 2013, and the last payment will be in 2023 when the TIF ends.
Amy, did we have flexibility in this TIF? Was any of it, we had a lot of development in there. Was any of it committed to a developer?
No. Next, we have the Charleston Neck, also known, oh, I'm sorry. You're on mute.
You're
I'm
muted,
sorry,
you're
Gretchen.
muted.
So you said that we have unspent, undesignated dollars yet in that because we don't know exactly what the final phase 5 will be for the September.
And we don't have that 10 million right now. I'm saying until like up through 2023, by the end of the TIF, we're expecting to have possibly that amount, but we're just hanging back to find out about the phase 5 of.
Right. So if let's assume best case, we keep, we haven't obligated close to that 10 million. Can we start a project and then not finish it? We have to finish it by 23, right?
Maybe Jeremy can help me. There's a certain amount of time that we have to spend the TIF funds. Otherwise, we have to pay it back to the other taxing authorities.
Right. That's fine. You can tell us later. I think that's just a little placeholder to keep in mind for next year.
It needs to be budgeted, Councilwoman Jackson, not spent. So as long as the final budget's been approved, spending it, you do have some time after that.
Okay, good.
Hey, Amy, I do have a question as well. The school district and the relationship with the TIFs, what would be in their benefit to participate in the TIF? Aren't they foregoing tax revenues if they participate in the TIF?
All of us are. Anybody that participates is foregoing tax revenues, but you got to look at the long-term goal. So, over time, the property values increase and the tax revenue you will receive will increase. So at the end of the TIF, you'll have a lot more tax revenue if it's a successful TIF. So it's like you got to look at it long-term, not immediate what you will get now. And like I said, we'll still get the base property tax value. So you won't miss out on the taxes you have already currently been getting. You'll still get that over the time period of the TIF. You just won't get the increment.
Gotcha. And it's up to the district to decide on it based on each TIF, and they can back out at any point?
No, once they're committed, they're committed.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Amy, let me interrupt. That's one good point, Councilman Sackman, in that if the blighted area stayed blighted, then tax revenues won't grow. So the school district has really no way to grow their tax base beyond natural inflation. If it were not for cities that came along with incentives and improved that infrastructure, put in that bluestone sidewalk, granite curb and guttering, ornamental lighting, improved the drainage, the hotels and the office buildings and the restaurants wouldn't come. That's a fact point that the mayor tried to push over when we tried to do West Ashley TIFs, and it fell on ears that frankly really didn't know how a TIF works. If you say, well, obviously school needs money, how do they put growth component into their revenue stream? Now, when this TIF matures, say in 2023, you're not ready for this question, but they're gonna get a windfall. Right, Amy? I mean,
Yeah, they'll get a lot. I can do that calculation for you and report it back to you in terms of how much they would, you know, from when it started to now, what the increased tax revenues will be to each of the taxing jurisdictions.
So,
Thank you.
so Councilmember Saccharin, if I may chime in, when the gateway was initially started in 1993 or whenever, the school board did participate. What happened when the city went back and asked for a 5 or 10-year extension, I forget how long it was. At that point, Mayor Riley got the county to agree to the extension, but the school district did not agree to the extension. They were at the end of that initial window that they could not have pulled out at any time. They had to at least stay in until their initial agreement period was over. Now, when we formed a new one recently, they wouldn't even agree to participate from the get-go. So now our West Ashley districts and the Morrison Drive district, if I'm correct, do not include anything past, well, Morrison Drive, I stand corrected, but I think on the West Ashley one, the first one, they did just a smaller percentage than what we asked, but they did participate. But then the second one, with the Bee Ferry Road District, they did not participate at all, if I'm correct.
That's
Miss
correct.
Creek. Yeah.
Yep, that's correct.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay to move on?
yeah.
Okay. So next we have the Charleston Neck, also known as Magnolia, and that is the map of just the Magnolia TIF area. And it was adopted in 2004. It was amended to extend it by another 10 years because when this was started, recession hit. It was it had a lot of problems to start out with. It will expire in 2039. The beginning equalized assessed value is 5.6 million. It was revised just for property values and adding some properties to 7.7 million. And as of 12/31/2019, it's at 24.2 million. This TIF has a public infrastructure improvement agreement with HR Charleston LLC. So all of the TIF funds are used to pay or reimburse for public infrastructure costs associated with HR Charleston. Current project plans I will show you on the next slide. And right now we're currently working with the developer on a possible amendment to that public infrastructure improvement agreement. These were the original projects that were included in the project allocation. This tranche one, this $41 million, most of that has been paid out to this point. Tranche two is our public works facility, which should be next. And then tranche three is just more infrastructure. Any questions on that?
Question for you.
Mhm.
How much affordable housing have we used our TIF dollars for?
And this TIF, none.
Okay, just wanted that to make sure we know that.
These are the equalized assessed values and related revenues. So there's the 7.7 initial and the 24.2. The revenue associated with that equalized assessed value in 2019 was $4.4 million.
Has any of that been tapped for bonding?
So here's the bonds.
Okay.
So there's currently 3 bonds outstanding. We had a $12.1 million bond in 2013. Last payment for that bond is in 2026. We had an $18 million bond in 2018. Last payment for that will be in 2034. And in 2020, we have a $7.9 million bond, which will be, the last payment is in 2035. And we do expect to do another borrowing in 2021.
And those dollars went towards, give us some example, to pay for what?
So it was repaying HR the Highland group for the public interest. Most of what they're doing is in the ground right now for environmental remediation and all of that.
Okay. Part of it paid for the bridge.
That was way long time ago. That's not included in any of these borrowings.
All right.
That was 15 million, right?
I don't think it was that much,
I thought it
Councilmember.
was
Gregory.
10 or 11.
I think it was 10. Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, it was 10 million in 2007.
Okay, thank you.
So next we have, unless anybody has any questions on the neck TIF, I'll move on. Next is our Cooper River Bridge, established in 2007. This is in all of the blue there. That is the map of the TIF. And then it was adopted in 2007. It'll expire in 2032. Equalized assessed value at the beginning of the TIF was 1.9 million, and it is 14.5 as of 12/31/2019. These are the currently planned and approved projects we had. We had one borrowing already, and that's what basically these projects have been allocated to. So there was an affordable housing. You can see there what we're about $3 million for affordable housing projects. And then drainage and stormwater. Pedestrian safety, we have the Brigade Street Bikeway and then Morrison Drive edge conditions for $473,000. And then community development and recreation, St. Julian Divine, Cooper River Bridge, multi-use trail, Hampstead Park, and this was a more recent addition for the James Lewis Apartments MWBE Business Incubator. Right now, we have a balance left of $337,000 that has not been allocated.
Amy, this is probably going to sound like an off-the-wall question, but I have to ask.
It won't be the first.
I know. We know that the purpose of the TIF is to be used in blighted areas, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
My question, though, is what influence does the TIF have on gentrification of those areas, particularly if we're not infusing any dollars into either, using TIF dollars, I'm not saying the community development's not, that we're not taking some of this TIF dollars to not just deal with infrastructure, but to also sort of deal with the preservation of affordability, especially with some of the properties that are in those areas.
Well, that is one of the criticisms of TIFs, right? That, you increase the property value. So you have to make sure you're delicately balancing that. I don't know if that really answers your question, but.
It does.
Okay. So.
Council member, if I may chime in here as well.
Could you turn your volume up, Mayor?
I'd have to put my microphone on.
Okay.
Hold on a second.
Dottie, is those your birds we're hearing in the background?
Yeah.
It's quite appealing.
It is. I'm looking around in my.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Much better.
So there was a measure that passed the state legislature just this past year, and maybe Jeremy has a better description of this than I do, but it essentially enabled affordable housing to be a TIF eligible expense. And so even for the developer, if there's a nonprofit or developer that has covenants for affordable housing that's definitive, that can be a TIF eligible expense now, when I think before last year that was not the case.
Right.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor. So
just to let you know,
because of that change, it's the only part of a TIF project now that's not required to be publicly owned. If it's for affordable housing, it can be privately owned. based on that 80% test that Amy referenced earlier. But that is new as of last year. You're correct.
Thank you.
Unbelievable opportunity.
So just the related revenue for 2019, the assessed value was 14.5. The revenue related to that was 3.4 million. So there's one bond outstanding that I mentioned. That's what all those projects were allocated to. Last from 12 million. Last payment is in 2033. We're planning another borrowing in 2021, estimating around 10 to 12 million, but we'll see when we shop it with the banks. And then there's been discussion with the CD committee as to some potential projects for that second borrowing. But I don't believe they've been completely vetted yet.
So we only have 12 years, a little bit less than 12 years to go in this. before this matures.
That's it.
And if you compare the revenue that will probably be raised out of this, and you compare that to, one of the most successful ones, which was King Street, what's your conservative projection going forward? I guess how much this.
I don't know. It's doing, the last few years it's been doing pretty well. So hopefully it will stay on that path. It's 661% increase, which is good. The last few years have been really, the TIF has been doing really well.
So we do have ongoing development in this. Okay. But comparing it to King Street, is it similar?
I'll go back. So King Street, I think, has a 800 and some odd percent. Let me go back to it. 871% increase. So it's doing fairly well.
Okay. All right.
It's just the assessed value is higher. You know what I mean? It all depends on assessed values too. Assessed value is higher in King Street Gateway than it is in Cooper River.
Okay, great.
I would think this might be where we do a lot of thoughtful work in balancing what we want in this TIF compared to concerns about continuing to gentrify a longstanding Black community. So I celebrate the fact that we can have the affordable housing use, and so they can't all be the rock stars of shopping districts and tourist districts and things. We want a respectable livability neighborhood, and I think that's what Cooper River is going to be known for. It's going to be great on that basis.
Okay, the next is the Horizon, also known as West Edge, and that's the map in purple there for the TIF district. It was adopted in 2008. The term is 35 years for the city and 30 years for the school district in the county. It was amended in 2014 to extend it. And so we extended to 2043, the county and the school district extended to 2038. Beginning of the TIF was 11.7. Right now it's at 19.8. And this TIF actually saw a decrease because it was during the recession. So the equalized assessed value actually went down 1 year. And so now it's rebounding back. It has a development agreement with 99 West Edge and a master development agreement with West Edge Foundation and Charleston Horizon DevCo. All TIF funds are used to pay or reimburse for the public infrastructure costs. Increases in assessed values are contributed to the private development successes of the Carolina Apartments, the 10 West Edge project, and the 22 West Edge project, and future private investments that we know that are coming soon is the purchase of the Harbor Tower and the redevelopment of that property, other property sales along the September Clark Highway, and further development in the West Edge corridor. So you can see, I should have probably included where it actually went down, but 11.7, it's at 19.8. The revenue associated with that was 2.2 million. There's one bond outstanding that we did in 2017 for $3 million. Last payment is in 2033. We're planning on another borrowing in 2021. We're actually in discussions with banks now. We're estimating that borrowing to be $18 million. And that borrowing will be used to repay the promissory notes outstanding to MUSC Foundation and the City of Charleston for our public infrastructure cost contributions. And it will also be used to defray the cost of public infrastructure projects in phase 2. Phase 2 includes Gadsden Creek and its related drainage improvements, and also the improvements to Haygood Street. Any questions on that?
Amy, I would just add that this district also includes that little jog down on Calhoun Street. So one notable new development would be that proposed 295 Calhoun Street right there at the corner of Halsey Boulevard and Calhoun.
Okay, so next is West Ashley. And that is the map of West Ashley TIF district. It was adopted December 6, 2016. It is a 25-year TIF for the city and 20 years for the county and the school district. It will expire in 2041 for the city and 2036 for the school district and the county. As the mayor said, the school district is only contributing 45% of tax revenues to the district. They keep 55%. Beginning of the TIF equalized assessed value was 18.4 and it's 19.9 as of 12/31/2019. As you can see there is no revenue associated because, like I said, until we do a borrowing, we don't capture the revenues. And it's grown by 8%. Like I said, we don't have revenue numbers. And the initial public improvements plan were new public spaces and parks, streetscape, civic buildings, cultural facilities, recreation, sports facilities, transportation infrastructure improvements, parking facilities, and stormwater infrastructure improvements. That's what the TIF document says. And then a memorandum of understanding was approved with the Epic Center in 2020. 3 properties that comprise the current Citadel Mall will be tracked separately from the full TIF, and those revenues from those parcels will be used to secure bonds or to pay directly costs associated with public infrastructure improvements specifically to those parcels. And they wouldn't be paid directly until after a borrowing. Usually with the TIFs, you just use the increment to borrow money to further the TIF. And then at the end, when it gets closer to the end is when you do pay as you go. You don't do pay as you go until that point in time because you want to leverage as much as you can to invest more into the TIF. Does that make sense?
Say that last part again, Amy.
So you wouldn't use pay as you go for these TIFs right now. You can't do that until you do a borrowing, and then all the revenue that is all the increment should be used for more borrowings to invest more in the TIF. So you wouldn't use pay as you go until the end of a TIF when you have no more borrowings and the TIF is successful. Does that make sense? Okay.
Okay.
And then we're currently working with developers for the Sumar Street property on a development agreement as well.
Which is that property is owned by the city. It's sort of interesting. We've got this much revenue in there with a piece of property, valuable piece of property in the city, just owned by the city, who's not paying any taxes right now.
That's right.
And also the other end of the TIF is Citadel Mall, which is of course very commercial, but it's still in the early stages of the redevelopment for that as well. I mean, neither one of these tips of this TIF are showing its full potential. I mean, it was still very much in the
they're
stages.
new. Yeah, they're very new. And I should have mentioned too, the West Ashley TIF actually decreased in value too because of the sale of the Citadel Mall was at such a bargain price. So it actually decreased the TIF for 1 year as well.
Amy, the question that Councilmember Gregory brought up about lighted areas, this TIF is very much commercial, geographically commercial. And I know we'll get to the other West Ashley TIF in a second, but the commercial boundaries of a TIF obviously produce much more potential than a non-commercial area. That's sort of a rule of thumb, isn't it?
Because the commercial properties are taxed at a higher rate.
Yeah, and then the oxymoron of all this is that you've got to show a blighted area, which we do, but still it's a high yield producing area at the same time. That's sort of the inconsistency with it. And that I think, I don't want to steal Councilmember Gregory's thought, but here we are, we're taking an area that's somewhat economically depressed, turning around and revitalizing it. And then the end result can be this unification that he's talking about. You're driving up prices and property values to a point that the word we use very frequently around here is unintended consequences. That's the unintended consequence that can happen with some of this. That's the downside of all of this the scheme.
It can be, yes.
It can be. Not that it always is, but it can be.
So
Well,
next, sorry.
that's one thing before leaving that, Amy, West Ashington. Remember, council member, if, it's a big if, the developer with the mall does build out those apartments, there's going to be
right
a couple of hundred, maybe it was like between 200 and 300 affordable units to be built there, if that comes to pass. But for the TIF, that probably would not have happened, so if it does happen. And even if another developer were to flip into it, that's one of the problems with tying TIF money to a developer that, in my opinion, is underfunded. Okay. I said that, y'all didn't say that, but let's go by and let's take a look at the last 3 years, what happened. So and I'll stand up to that. I'll be happy to be wrong, by the way. But when you tie the money to a developer, it takes flexibility away from the city to potentially take some of those proceeds and put it towards Sumar Street, for example, Councilman Shaheen. So, and then this is another example that the mayor alluded to, where the school district, Councilman Saccharin, I think they only participate to the tune of 45%, versus King Street, they were all in 100%. So it makes it a little different to accumulate money. Amy, my areas, this is obviously in and out of the city. So when that map comes from Savannah Highway all the way to Northbridge, right? Areas that's in the county and not in the city. If a hotel was to be built there, does any of those additional taxes come into the city, TIF?
It will during the TIF, but if it's in the county and not in the city, once the TIF is over, because then we would not get any of that tax revenue. But right now, because we're capturing all the taxing jurisdictions funds, it will go to the TIF, but when that's over, it would not come to the city. Does that make sense?
Well, no, I'm still confused. Okay, so
you said
I confused me too.
Maybe I'm confused. It could be. If it's in the county and it's not in the city, is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, so during the duration of the TIF, we would capture it because all the taxing jurisdictions are contributing to the TIF. So it would go to the TIF fund. But once the TIF is over, because it's in the county, it would not come to the city.
I follow you. Okay, so for example, this
Jeremy's scowling at me. Did I say something wrong?
I forgot about Zoom.
You can't hide, Jeremy. You can't hide.
So, Councilman Waring, the question is, there's property that's not in the city limits.
Yeah, let me give you an example. For example,
oh yeah, you're right. It would never.
So it's not going to be captured by the TIF.
Yeah, that's right. It would never come to the city.
Only property in the city can be in the city's TIF.
Yeah, sorry, that was wrong. You're absolutely right. That's why he's scowling at me. It would never come.
I got it. So, for example, on DuPont Road, there were 2 hotels built, but they're in the county. They're not annexed to the city. So we just out of luck on those.
Mm-hmm. It would have to be in the original TMS numbers that were in the TIF to begin with. So we have, all the TMS numbers when we did the ordinance, it would have to be in it from that start. And then later we could add stuff, right? We could add TMS numbers if they approved it, correct, Jeremy?
Correct. You'd have to go back if you're expanding it.
And that would be by ordinance or resolution, but it would have to be one of those TMS numbers. Sorry, I misunderstood too.
Okay, so
I told you I was confused.
Amy, before you leave and go to Church Creek, I think what Councilmember Waring said is a very important point that we need to remember. how this TIF is going directly to impact the creation of affordable and workforce housing in the Epic Center. And that's something that's a wonderful example of a private and public partnership that we're doing. I mean, this is, and we probably need to be thinking about more of that in the future, because that's a win-win-win-win-win across the board for our residents and the developer and the city, all the way around with that. So it's just, I'm glad you pointed that out, Councilman Waring, and it's just important for the public to be aware of how we're actually in a so-called blighted area, but we are in the process of increasing the opportunity for more affordable housing.
Right.
That's a huge benefit for the community. It really is.
Right.
You
So
do put all your eggs in a developer's basket,
I
Council.
agree with that.
I agree with Councilmember Waring. We're crossing our fingers behind our back, hoping that that's the right horse.
But one
Well,
thing-
I would have subscribed to that, Carol. I think Councilman Jackson. I think that we're all working on good faith with this, and we're still working diligently on the Sumar Street project. We haven't hit gold yet with that.
Councilman Pell want to say something.
It's been up for a while.
Yeah, we can,
Yeah.
We don't listen to the rookies anymore. They have to wait to the bottom.
Oh, okay, listen to that.
Peter, you can finish your thought of it.
No, I wasn't going to.
He's bad.
I think the idea is that we are operating in good faith with the Epic Center
Sure.
folks and with the people over who are working on the other side of this test.
I did not mean to say we were not operating in good faith.
Yeah, but cross our fingers behind our back.
Councilman Pell.
okay.
Councilman.
Fingers in our toes. How's that?
So let's get Councilman Pell in there.
Thanks, guys. I don't want to hijack Amy's presentation too much, but I think it's great that the legislature amended the statute to allow affordable housing to be built with TIF dollars, but this is a very inefficient way to go about trying to address the issue of affordable housing. I just have to say, and provide a contrarian view here. The whole point of the TIF is for property values to skyrocket. That is the whole goal. That's how TIFs work. That's how they have money. A failed TIF is when property values don't go up. So you're in this situation where property values are going up, hopefully by a lot. And then great, we can do 50 units here, 60 units there. It's just not an efficient way of making progress on the issue. It's important. Those 50 units are great. Those 60 units are great. However many units we can do through the TIF is wonderful. And that's moving the needle in a positive direction. But it would be wrong to sit back and think TIFs are this affordable housing engine. That's not what they were ever designed to do. In fact, well, I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but property values and property value appreciation is core to this whole framework. This is designed to address slums and blighted areas. That's the idea behind TIFs at its core. Now, to be fair, the city has expanded that beyond that framework. But we got to understand here, there is a tension in this, and Councilmember Gregory has put his finger on it. But we got to be clear with what this is all about. And y'all know my thoughts on what we really got to do to get affordable housing under control. So that's for another day.
Yeah, but this is the point I was trying to make with this contrary view that we're dealing with. We're addressing blighted areas, and to your point, Councilmember Pell, we want the property values that we're capturing to be high yield property values. We want them to be successful in non-blighted property values. And so here we are, we're capturing the money from a high yield property to help a blighted area. And the consequence of that is sometimes that we're creating a problem that we weren't intending to create, which is running out people. That's the point. And then Councilman Waring's point, which I think is important to remember, is to avoid that from happening, we're dedicating and making sure that we are sending that money to a project that's going to address affordable workforce housing. That is a balance of this thing that makes sense to me, that you avoiding that running out of people because the property value is going too high by making sure you're putting money dedicated to a project that's going to help with that issue.
Right. Well, let me say this. I'm
Right.
trying to keep this on track. I think that's another meeting we need to get together and work on. But the goal, I think, would be in a blighted area to buy land before the appreciation goes up in a residential area, which doesn't hurt the TIF that much. But my last question on West Ashley, are we accounting for revenues that's outside the Epic Center's footprint? And if so, how much money have we accumulated in the areas outside that's obligated to the developer? Jeez.
So Councilmember Waring, we don't have revenue numbers yet because we don't have the borrowing, but the assessed value here is for the whole entire TIF. It does not, I'm just saying we internally are going to have to, we're gonna have to keep track of those parcels ourselves, but whatever numbers I show you will be the full TIF numbers.
Okay, thank you. I'm gonna let you keep on going because you're doing a great job.
Well, just a quick question though.
Yeah, Councilman Gregory.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, a couple of things. While I don't disagree with Councilman Ross Appel, this does provide us with an alternative source of funding for affordable housing. How we do it is a different question. But in addition to that, areas that we consider blighted, okay, they are neighborhoods with people who have backgrounds, churches, a whole bunch of social issues that are associated with it. So I was going a little beyond, okay? I was thinking more in terms of if we can attempt to even resurrect some of the existing, as opposed to being like urban renewal, Carol, and you just tear them all down. Neighborhoods, people, and everything's gone. I just don't want the TIF to ultimately end up that same way.
I knew that was coming out of you, Councilman. I saw that across your eyebrows. Amy, continue, please.
Okay. Next, we have the Church Creek TIF was adopted on December 4th, 2018. It is a 25-year TIF. It'll expire in December of 2043, and the school district is not participating at all in this TIF. Beginning equalized assessed value is 3.3 million, and it is 5.4 as of 12/31/2019. So as you can see, again, there's no revenue associated because we don't have that borrowing. That's went from 3.3 to 5.4. And then it's grown by 61% in just that 1 year. We don't, like I said, we don't have revenue numbers, and it's dedicated specifically to stormwater and drainage improvements. Any questions on that one?
And Amy, that TIF is mainly made up of residential property, correct?
Oh, did I not? I didn't put a map in there, did I? I'm sorry. I didn't put a map in this one.
No, not
I don't know. It's got commercial in there as well.
It's got the West Acton Circle and all.
Yeah.
It's mostly commercial. It's got up and down Beach Ferry Road and the West Ashley Circle, and the future extension of the Glen McConnell, which will have some commercial as well. So I would just point out, based on some comments made, that most every district is focused on commercial properties. The best example is the Cooper River Bridge District. It runs up and down Hugie, Meeting. It does come over to East Bay to catch the cigar factory and that new development that I guess was being planned for just below the cigar factory. But we haven't typically gone and picked up big residential neighborhoods as part of TIF districts. Seems like the only one that's that broad is the Magnolia district that was done 20 something years ago. And the other thing I wanted to point out was, that when each district is created, it meets that state requirement of quote blighted, but there's 10 different measures, I think, that you have to meet a certain number of them. And even Church Creek qualified because of the impact of flooding on the district. It wasn't that Beach Ferry Road looked like a slummy, blighted area, right? It looked fine. But the impact of flooding and drainage made enough of a difference for us to meet that qualification to be able to legally create the district. So anyway, I just thought I'd share those couple of comments. Thanks.
Okay, so next is Morrison Drive, and it's very new. So it was adopted October 8, 2019. It's a 30-year TIF. The school district is only participating until 2039 and is only participating with respect to specific parcel numbers. And those were the parcels that came out of the Magnolia or NEC TIF into Morrison Drive. Beginning value was $876,000, and right now we have no information from the county because it wasn't designated until 2019. So I can't really report anything out because it's very new. So just more information to come on this TIF. And then that was really it for those TIFs. And then just some notes on what makes a TIF successful. It's private investment. Growth of a TIF is dependent on private investments. Example is a waterfront park TIF. Most of that area was developed by private investment. The condominium complexes, the hotels, and all of that allowed the city to complete waterfront park. And the same with the King Street Gateway TIF. Mostly private investment, hotels, apartment buildings, and other commercial developments. And the success of that TIF has allowed over $50 million to be allocated to the Septima Clark Drainage Project and over $30 million to the renovation of the Gilliard Center. And that's just the direct contribution, not including the debt payments that we're making for the Gilliard Center as well. And then I showed you the public improvements, the other public improvements for the King Street Gateway TIF. That's really all I had. If anybody has any questions.
Amy, I think you did a marvelous job on a very complicated subject. It's almost like trying to explain state tax law, which is complicated as all giddy up. Any questions from council members? I can't see everybody's hand, so I mean.
I just want to echo your sentiments, Councilman Waring, for Amy's dedication and putting this together and explaining to us what she had. And I just think that one of the things you can show, Amy, and you had these charts, is just the incredible benefit that we're getting out of this. And you look, without this money being captured, or I think that someone said intercepted at one point, the way of understanding it, look at what we would not, look at what we were able to do and accomplish with those funds, and what we could not have been able to accomplish if those TIFs had not been created by prior administrations. And what we're doing now is just carrying on that success, I hope, with these other TIF districts coming online. I mean, this is a huge benefit to the community. It really is. Having $50 million allocated to the Septima Clark drainage improvement is just, that's a big number. That's just, we could not have done that drainage improvement without that money being available.
That's 5 years worth of drainage monies right there. And the flexibility, Councilman J.A., because it wasn't tied to a developer. As a matter of fact, Mr. Mayor, we dodged the bullet unknowingly. There was a proposal once to, this may have predated you, but there was a proposal once to create a Marion Square type park up around where the U-Haul is on Spring Street and King Street and back around Columbus Street. And the monies to do that, let's call it some 15 million, was going to come out of the King Street TIF fund. Had we done that, and had that been tied to the U-Haul people and whoever else the landowners were to move and go elsewhere, we would not have had that 50 million to go toward. We didn't know it was going to be a $45 million overrun on Spring Fishburne Septima Clark drainage project. But because we had that flexibility, we were able to do that. And for the new people on council, newly elected people on council, it was a hard meeting, but I would say this, it was a unanimous vote to take 5 years, at least 5 years, could have been 6, 5 years of all the drainage money. So there would have been no drainage projects, West Ashley, James Island, and Johns Island, the ones we kind of talk about now with Mr. Fountain, we couldn't have done any of those because all the dollars were going to be committed to a project that was ongoing that we couldn't just stop, which was with September Clark Spring Fishburne. Well, with the money from the King Street TIF, obviously the city and council voted to, and the mayor voted to appeal to the infrastructure bank, and they granted that 22.5 million. But for the King Street TIF dollars, we would not be doing a serious drainage project in West Ashley for the next 5 years. So Councilman Appel, the Burns Down project, that wouldn't be going on now. Councilman Gregory, the Central Park Road wouldn't be going on right now because those dollars would have been dedicated to Spring Fishburne. What was it, Barberry Woods or whatever that is on Johns Island wouldn't be being done. So that flexibility infrastructure is a beast, man. We all know that when it comes to paying for it. But these TIF districts have been big winners in large ways. So I appreciate so much, Mr. Mayor, allowing this to be done, because I know when I came on council, I would love to have something like this done. Okay, so the way of spreading information, so we all can, as Tiger Woods said, come with our A game when these dollars come forth with best practices for the city to go forward. I can't thank you enough. I can't thank you enough, Amy, for making, again, what is a very, I wish somebody would do this presentation for the school district, because Mr. Mayor, when you went down to the school district to try to get the full participation on the West Ashley school TIF, West Ashley TIF, I went with you, and I spoke with Michael, Mike Smith, who was on there at the time. He asked me, I said, listen, we need your vote, man. We need all the dollars there so we can fix up a blighted area. And this is what a long-term member of the school district board told me. He said, well, if we need a daycare center, if the city would build us a daycare center, then I'd vote for this full participation. I said, Mike, do you realize where the money goes from a TIF? It goes to fix the drainage. It goes to make the streetscapes pretty, the landscaping and the sidewalks and the bikeways. It encourages the ornamental lighting. And when developers see things like that, they say, hey, I can do business over there too. And when we get the additional tax revenue, that's what we pay the drainage. That's how we pay off the drainage bonds and the cost of making the streetscapes and bikeways and sidewalks more attractive for people to transverse. You could tell those people on the board with the vote had no idea. They thought it was a bevy of money that we can go and play Santa Claus with or something like that. So, but I think this moves the ball forward a lot for all of us, I hope, on council. So thank you so much, Mr. Mayor, for allowing this. I appreciate all the council members, because we're running out of time every day. I saw in the paper where we had 65 council meetings. Was that true last year?
Yeah,
a lot. But
I asked Jennifer that question. I think it was 57. It wasn't quite 60, but it was in the 50s somewhere.
57 is still impressive, man. So anyway, I remember when it used to be 23, right? 23 or something like that. So anyway, but thanks again, Mr. Mayor, and all my colleagues on council for this. And any questions? Hopefully you can push this out. Well, you have pushed this out to us by email, Amy?
I haven't, but I will.
Oh, great. And I know there'll be questions in the aftermath, but thanks again.
So thank you for requesting it. And Amy, you did a terrific job. And she mentioned to me, she kind of has this now like a template. And so I would view every year when we get our updated numbers from the county that informs the new assessed value and the new revenue, that which would more likely be in the middle of the year going forward, because we don't normally get the information from them till April or May. So we could have an annual review of this, which I think would be very helpful. And I'll say that I've been around this since I worked for the city back in the 90s, but every time Amy goes through it, I feel like I understand it a little better. It is complicated stuff. So it's critical to our funding for the city, and we're really blessed that we've been able to that Mayor Riley and prior councils, and we've created 3 districts since I got elected, and to be honest with you, I didn't expect us to get even 3 set up.
Right.
So it's been it's a critical funding mechanism for the city, very important. We'll follow it every year. Thank you.
Councilman Sacrin have his hands up.
Okay, Councilman Sacrin?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. And thank you, Councilman Waring, for doing this, and Amy for getting this done. It's very helpful for me to see the bigger picture of especially the TIFs and the relationship with the school district. And I appreciate that background. Also, if Councilman Gregory's still on, this discussion for me was not just the financial piece, but I'm having offline discussions with some of our fellow council members, and I'm just going to tag on to what Councilman Appel was kind of alluding to. There are unintended consequences to the growth and prosperity in these TIF districts, and I think it's important that we acknowledge that, and if we can acknowledge that, what do we do to mitigate some of those unintended consequences? Because by the very nature of the TIFs, from what I'm hearing today, is to revitalize, change neighborhoods, and with that comes the exacerbation of gentrification in our city. So I'm just throwing that out there for conversation at some point. And when we start talking about the work on our commission and thinking through an equity lens, this squarely falls into that for me, is what are we doing for the next 5 or 10 years in exacerbating the problem of gentrification downtown, even though we want these TIF districts to flourish. So just, it's a thought for me, and it's been very helpful to kind of come full circle and think this through.
But Councilman Sacrin, great point. You and Councilman Appel, and Mr. Mayor, you can tap in on this. But as development came, let's say from Broad Street, down up the peninsula, properties like the Canterbury House, I mean, that could have been $1 million condos, but right now that's affordable housing for senior citizens in one of the highest real estate areas in America, and they get to enjoy the quality of life just like people who live in obviously the very fine homes down in that area. If you look at right across on the corner of Wentworth and Meeting Street, I think it's called the Grand Bohemian Hotel. The building, the cream color building, just on the other side of Justine's Restaurant, used to be the old Salvation Army building. It's now a senior citizen residential community. I happened to do the ribbon cutting. That was in 2015 after the Mother Emanuel tragedy, and Mayor Pro Tem Mitt Rowley obviously was going in 9 different directions, seriously. So I did the ribbon cutting there. These wonderful gray-haired ladies came over, not to hear me speak and do a ribbon cutting, but right afterward, it was a happy hour. And they wanted to see the Grand Hotel and participate on the rooftop with a happy hour. I'm sure those ladies on fixed incomes could not afford that, but somebody had the foresight, Rowley administration, to acquire that property before all those TIFs, and that property certainly was in one of the most successful TIFs, that wave of development came in and would have pushed incomes like that out of the neighborhood. So I think we have to be on the front end of thinking like that. And this is a topic for another meeting, because we had this on community development where we need to have some out of the box thinking around that low line for affordable housing. In particular, the property that we own, Mr. Mayor, with the Coca-Cola bottling plant, it's just outside one of the TIFs right now. But I'm wondering if we can annex, it's right across the street from the TIF, as a matter of fact, but there's got to be a way we can manifest some monies off this TIF to acquire affordable housing there, get our recreation department, possibly, West Ashley, along with the SC&G property, which opens up, we could put hundreds of affordable housing units there. And this is the time to come up with the think tank to do that. As a matter of fact, before this meeting today, Mr. Mayor, I called Bob Brennan. Bob Brennan is the former CFO. He's not the former, he's the current CFO for Mr. Jerry Richardson, who used to own the Carolina Panthers and recently sold it, gave $4 million to the International African American Museum. Well, Bob is the finance chair. So I called Bob, and he chaired the process for new market tax credits, which provided almost $5 million to the International African American Museum. I said, Bob, could you check in to see if we can somehow qualify for new market tax credits for this low line project that we got going? I don't know if anybody's even looked into that, but I believe with some of the blighted area that backs up to the low line, it would be great if we can get an additional source of funding, potentially with new markets tax credits along the commercial areas of the low line that's going to be developed. So I'm all for development. I want to develop in a cost-effective means. I think we can provide some affordable housing before all the stuff is finished and get maybe a half a dozen different funding sources. But again, that's for another day. But the excitement is there. But I tell you what, the excitement's got to be there. So, see, one of the things about Charleston that maybe you all who just moved here, those of us who are from here know this, but that peninsula used to be a place where the rich family used to have an au pair. But that au pair also lived on the peninsula, had affordable housing right on, and believe it or not, it was private sector in most cases, affordable housing. We've gotten to the point right now to where, Mr. Mayor, do we have anybody in City Hall that actually lives on the peninsula? I don't think we do, because they can't afford to do it. So it's going to be up to stewards like us to acquire the property before it escalates further. And we'll get the money for the vertical piece, but we got to get the land.
So if I may make one more comment before we sign off, and Councilmember Saccharin, I didn't want it to sound like we were beating up on the school district. They really got stuck in a crack with property tax reform about 8 or 10 years ago. It really has made it difficult for them. And so even when they did the 45% for that West Ashley district, they were really being gracious to participate. And I totally get the crack that they're in. So I didn't want it to sound like we were beating up on them. They have real legitimate issues in making decisions about participating in these things, because they're looking at their income right now and next year. And even though long-term benefit is there for them, their property tax situation got turned upside down, and they got to look out for next year. I get that.
Can I just respond to? Yeah, I agree, and I think Act 388 has completely turned things upside down for the district. So when we talk about not participating in a TIF, and again, I'm not in those conversations, but as a district's employee, a lot of their needs are immediate. What are we doing in the next year? So asking them to think long term is not feasible.
Right.
So, anyways, and I agree, Mayor, and I appreciate that comment.
I think Councilman Gregory has his hands up.
The councilman, yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, just a couple of points. If we are going to try to develop along the low line, we'd better get busy with acquisition. And I mean now, because people are already acquiring many of the residential properties along the low line because they know what's coming. Secondly, I don't want TIF to end up again like an urban renewal, or like when the Gilliard was developed and literally moved hundreds of African-American families from that area. And there are other similar projects. So I just I'm going to continue to be this way, because I think that we need to really be sensitive in any development that we do, okay? That wherever we can preserve or acquire properties to maintain them to be affordable in the TIF district, I just think that we should do that.
All right, any final questions? I have to Amy was burning the midnight oil on this.
Yeah. Councilwoman Waring, can I just echo something that Councilwoman Gregory just said?
Yes.
And because that really impacts, his comments really impact an area that you and I and Councilwoman Saccharin represent, which is the parts of the Maryville, Ashleyville area. And we we are very sensitive. I know all three of us are very sensitive to watching that area develop. And we've spent a lot of effort into in time with, well, my time, Higgins Pier, and now the Carl Richardson Park that come over there. And we're talking about the improvements to Backway and Gateway, and we're working on that's Sycamore project. All that is going to have an impact. And we're revitalizing. We want to revitalize that area. But to Councilmember Gregory's point, I mean, that's a concern for all of us, because we don't want that neighborhood to lose its character and lose its long-term residents. Those folks have been there. I think some of them can trace their time there back into the late 19th century. I mean, and that's some of the ways on all of our minds. I know it does, but it's not just downtown we were thinking about. It's right here in our backyard, literally. We got to be keep our eye on the ball with that stuff.
I agree 100% with that too, Mr. Chairman. Before we sign off, even with the low line, and I don't want to see even the low line where so many people have lost their properties anyway along the low line, because the low line was actually, people don't know, it was a separation of the cities, east and west, and that's what the tracks was, and that's where the tracks came about. So we have a lot of people along the low line was there a long time, but they're being displaced. They're going to be displaced too, because some of them have already been displaced, as Councilman Gregory alluded to. People are buying up the properties, so we have to be very aggressive in moving and trying to get these things done to make sure that we're still going to have that people diversity living there, the people who would like to stay in that particular area. We don't want to displace anybody else that we have that have been displaced already. So we need to look at those things very carefully. But as far as the Gilliard, the bridge, September Clock, and all these different places, I lived through all that and seeing it all done, and we need to do better, and we need to get on it right away.
You're right. We got to work hard, but I'll tell you what now. I mean, this council and council before it,
we tried.
The affordable housing that's going on the bridge site is phenomenal. That's one of the big victories I think we all have to champion and share that news as we go out, because that property could have been sold.
Oh, yes.
The bridge site could have been sold, and you could have private development going in there instead of the housing authority, with Grace Homes and now the James Lewis Homes. And I forget the one that Humanities are just getting ready to, we just approved, I don't know, a month ago for Humanities. That's a huge victory, man. There will be, I don't know how many, 200 units there that on that swath of property that, but for the efforts of the mayor and council, and certainly the previous administration as well, it took a collective. Affordable housing would not be on that property.
I agree 100% with you, and I have to give the mayor some props on that too. Really. Because he pushed with that, because when they first had it, Mr. Mayor, you might not realize it, but they had a different plan for that particular area at 85 Calhoun Street. And that's when I went and turned the whole table over, because I tell them not on my watch. It's not.
I remember that. But the plan, believe it or not, fellas, the plan looked like Colonial Lake.
Yeah, they had wrong about
the big lake for drainage. It was a big lake for drainage, and you had houses around. I may still have that drawing. I ought to frame it and give it to you, Councilman.
I turned it over. I said, no, my you didn't tell me nothing about it. No, sir. No. So I said, housing is going back there. So this is what we did. We pushed for that with the council, and we are starting it out. So it's coming to petition now. So I would thank everybody for that.
Even South Carolina State. Thank you, Councilman.
I'm a little crazy, but then it's all good.
All right. Well, listen,
all right, everybody.
Thank everybody for their time, and it's been very good information, Amy. We can't give you an attaboy. We got to do better than that. One time we saw Amy's little daughters, and I think Bill gave some money for ice cream cone. We got to do something better than that for Amy.
They're not so little anymore.
You're right. You're right.
No.
Buy her a car, council member.
Oh.
Yeah, you know what? Riley's gonna be 15 soon. That would be great. Thanks.
Oh.
Councilmember Bell.
I think by acclamation, if we all in, that's it. But thanks again. Good work. Good work.